All right, welcome to Witchpolice Radio. So one of the things that I do a lot on this show, and I think this is something that regular listeners would know, is that I'm always talking to artists about sort of their new projects, stuff they have coming up, albums they just released. And in this case, the guest I'm talking to, we're talking about something that's definitely not new. It's new to me. I just sort of stumbled upon it fairly recently, but there's a bit of a long history here that goes well beyond sort of the usual time frame of people I talk to on the podcast. So I think that maybe... Sure. Yeah. The best way to start this off is if you maybe just want to give a quick introduction of who you are and what it is that you do, or that you did at least back then.
My name's Jon Krocker. Way back when, we'll say like, okay.
Yeah, so go ahead and introduce yourself again. Sorry about that. I'll add.
Okay, my name's Jon Krocker. Let's see, probably late 70s to middle 80s, I started playing keyboards. And I still remember I was listening to the radio and I heard something. It was Emerson, Lake and Palmer's Lucky Man.
Okay.
And I thought, what the heck is that weird sound at the end? So I wasn't really interested. And then a little bit later, I started listening to that kind of music. And I decided I'd take keyboards. So I started taking, of all things, formal organ playing, like with pedals and everything, classical organ. And then from then on, I just started listening to more and different music, and then just started really getting into music, and started getting into synthesizers. Didn't have a lot of money back then, so I started off small and then traded it in, got something better, and kept going like that. And then I started playing probably 3-4 hours a night every day for years. And then I thought that, hey, it'd probably be a good idea to start recording this stuff. So back then, I had a cassette player, so I started recording things. And I had pretty good chops back then. I was able to play fairly well. And so I started recording things, and then I bumped into, I don't know how, but there was this record store called Impulse Records,
right,
by Roman, owned by Roman Panchishin. And I went there, and he blew my mind. He turned me on to all this really, really different kind of music. And that's when I completely went perpendicular to, I was sort of into like Yes and Emerson, Lake and Palmer kind of stuff. And then
that makes sense from a keyboard perspective too, right? I mean, you're listening to these bands that have very prominent keyboard players.
I even had the Rick Wakeman long hair.
Yeah.
And then, Roman turned me on to all this really different stuff, and it spoke to me. And so I started going in that direction. And then, like I said, I was taping stuff, and then Roman said, bring some stuff in.
Cool.
So I brought some of the music in. He loved it. And then I just kept cranking out the music. And then he decided, like, hey, why don't release a cassette? So it took a while. The recordings weren't very good there. Luckily, we had somebody who could engineer the cassettes fairly well, and we got a pretty good master out of it, and we released, it was called Monologue, and that was back in I think about 82. Yeah, 81, 82, and we released this cassette tape. It actually did okay. We got some reviews back from like Japan, and they liked it in Holland, and that was cool. So I just kept playing. And then I had another perpendicular. I started getting into samplers. And then I started playing completely different music, like real-time music concrete.
Okay, cool.
And then I've just been playing since. I lost my hands for a while. I couldn't play. Like, I didn't lose my hands, but I think I burned out or something. And then I stopped playing, and I got into the, what do they call it? It's gear acquisition syndrome.
Yeah.
So trying to find where in the heck am I going to go now, because I started to veer away from keyboards and more into controlling sounds. And then so I just kept playing like that. And then about, I think I was trying to find the earliest instance. I think it was around 2014 or around that time, some guy named Damien Furland emailed me
Yeah, I
and
know him.
said,
Yeah.
hey, yeah, and said, hey, I really like your music. I know this guy, and his name's Josh Sheon, and he, what's the record? Dark Entry Records.
Right.
And he's sort of like a patron of music. And Damien sent the tape to Josh. Josh freaked out, got a hold of me and said, I want to cut this. And it took probably about 4 years of back and forth doing the getting a good master. What is the album going to look like, as in the face of the album, the artwork, and all that stuff. And to be perfectly candid, I sat on it for a little bit because it was kind of hard to believe that this was happening. You know, some guy from San Francisco says, hey, I want to make a record out of your cassette. So I went, whatever. It was weird. And then so
I was going to just ask, how long had it been? I mean, since that cassette had been out of circulation, it must have been years by that point, since it had been, you sold all the copies originally, right?
Yes. So say 82, 84 was, say 82 was when we cut the cassette.
Yeah.
And that lasted for about a year or two. And then we just sort of lost interest. And then this would be about 4 years ago. No, 5, 6, about 2014.
Yeah. So it's decades and decades. Yeah.
Decades. So needless to say, when I got these emails, I thought, like, this is weird. I don't know if it's real. So then we kept going at it. And then all of a sudden, there's this box at my front door, and it's the shape of a record. It was a test pressing.
Oh, cool.
So I screamed and yelled and fainted. It's real, unbelievable. And so I played it, and it was great. The mastering was really, really good. And back and forth, and within a year, he released it, Josh Gian, on Dark Entry Records. And yeah, that's it. Totally weird. Out of nowhere, now I have a record.
What do you think is the staying power of that album? Because, like, I mean, you know, you're talking about doing this in 82. Like, I'm 40 this year. I was born in 82, and I'm listening to this for the first time in 2021, right? And like, I loved it. I heard this, like, this is great. And so, what is it that you think has made this? Obviously, this guy putting it out on vinyl, it spoke to him as well, right? And it spoke to Damien in order to pass it on to him. Like, there's something about this music that is still resonating. What do you think that has kind of lasted the test of time with this record?
It's pure electronic music. And it's like back then, this kind of stuff was very esoteric, fringe.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, I got it. I understood, and I was able to translate where I wanted to go. I had some, thanks to Roman, I had some incredible references of people that were on the leading edge doing that kind of stuff. And I managed to pull off real electronic, not like crazy, you know, like random stuff, that plain electronic music that's back then was cool. And now when I listen to it, I actually don't cringe. I think it's the last song on the second side still blows me away. I really, yeah, that's the word. I got it.
Yeah.
And it still has staying power. People that do listen to it, they're blown away by it. And that's really cool. It's something that I created back in '82.
Yeah.
Is still valid and present now. And
yeah, it's interesting.
yeah, and the album sort of jumps around a little bit. Is I think I went, well, maybe not. I shouldn't say that. Back then, there's a whole bunch of different styles in there, and there's there's some noise music.
Yeah.
And there's some really. I liked fast, dynamic, moving music, and fortunately, if you really listen to the record, you can hear there's one or two mistakes, but like I said, I had the chops and I could actually pull it off. And I had good equipment back then. Well, I was starting to get good equipment, and I was playing with another guy. We were Dialogue.
Right.
And that was Victor. And Victor actually had a 2-voice Oberheim for all the gearheads out there. And that machine was absolutely a fabulous sequencer. And I would start working on sequences. I also had it's an EML 400, which was a beast. And between those two sequencers, that would start, and then I'd sort of build on those things. So it was like the bass was pure electronic machine music. And I really,
I wonder if that's maybe part of the appeal. I think you might be right, is that, because I don't know if someone can make that same record now. They have the technology, obviously they could replicate the sounds, but doing that on a computer versus you doing it, with the actual technology of the time, I think it has some kind of an edge to it that maybe wouldn't be there if everything's sort of fabricated, on a computer now.
I would totally agree with that. Something that a lot of people don't know is 99% of the music on that record is live.
Yeah, I read that. That's really cool.
And so there's the energy there. I have a lot of gear, and throughout the years, there's no way I could reproduce that stuff, because you need specific machines.
Yeah.
And then you also have you need the headset of where I was at that time in order to get that kind of energy in there, in the rhythms and the polyrhythms and all that cool stuff happening. I think it would be not extremely. I think you'd have to be pretty hot to be able to recreate that. And I would consider that a real challenge for somebody to do, because the harmonies, because of all the sequencers, they're quite complex.
Mm-hmm.
And they move fast, and there's weird drumming happening in the background. So what an interesting concept. I don't know. That'd be fun. It'd be really
to try and redo it.
Yeah. But trying to get the gear again would break me, because the Oberheim 2-voice, it's a $12,000 to $14,000 instrument nowadays.
Right.
Very hard to get. And a mini Moog is like $4,000 to $6,000, and but yeah, it's got the energy of the time, that word zeitgeist.
Yeah,
it was
for sure.
there, and I was embracing it. And my life was electronic music back then, and I think that really carried through on the record. I was doing with Victor and by myself, we were doing all kinds of stuff because people were hearing us and they liked what we were doing. So we did stuff for the contemporary dancers, and I did something to plug in, which my lifelong regret was nobody had a video recorder. That was, we were really pushing the boundaries, and I think I made it work on Monologue.
Cool. Has this reissue a few years ago, is that kind of generated more interest just in general in what you're doing? Like, have you been sort of seeing people kind of rediscovering you now, and maybe even rediscovering some of that early electronic music?
I know there's a lot of people rediscovering older electronic music, like look what Josh is doing. There's a big market for that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But locally, no. I get a lot of there's people there's not enough people who are really into that kind of stuff anymore.
Yeah.
In the world, yes, but locally, no. Which kind of makes me gives me the itch. I want to go out and play again, but if I went out to play again, it wouldn't be anything like Monologue, because you have to move forward and advance from that kind of stuff.
And like you were saying, it's probably very difficult to replicate that exactly anyway. So even if it was like, hey, this is the guy who did Monologue, you're going to get to the show and you can't physically recreate that. There's
no way I've got the chops for that kind of stuff now. No way.
Have you been consistently making music since then? Like, whether you've released it or not, have you been actively playing?
I've been playing all the time, but I've got too much other stuff in the way. So I'm working on things and then it takes me away from music, and it really bugs me.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to get into it again. But I don't know what direction I'd go. I think if I finally get the will or the impetus to play again, something will come out of it.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what I'm hoping for. I'd really like to, I'd like to get out and play, because I still think, like Monologue back then, I would have something that is fresh and breaks down the boundaries and is different from what's out there now. Because what's out there now is, it's weird out there. There's too many beatboxes and Ableton and all that stuff, and it's really become, but I'm sure everybody says that throughout the decades.
Right. The next generation is not doing it right. Everyone assumes, yeah. But so, if you came back though and started playing shows and everything, you would just naturally have a different perspective on music, just from your experiences and your experience with that old equipment, and sort of translating that over the years into what you're doing now. So I think it's necessarily going to be different from what everyone else is doing, because someone who grew up using Ableton or do things like that, they don't have that, right? They don't have that history of having created things more directly, like
exactly. And I think, like back then, that was cool, because I remember many times I was filling my car up I was putting gas in my car, and some guy came up to me and he said, "You're Jon Krocker, aren't you?" And I said, "Well, what?" And he says, "I saw you play with Victor and Dialogue, and I thought your music was really cool."
Wow.
So, wow.
How many years had passed since he'd seen you play?
Oh, geez. Like like middle 80s.
Yeah.
To the 90s.
So it made an impact, obviously. Obviously, what you were doing then clearly affected him enough to remember you all these years later.
I should say that, like, when I played or Victor played or when we played together, people had a lot of problems with the music.
Okay.
I was going to say, in my eyes or in my ears, it wasn't that weird, but a lot of times people we got cat calls because they didn't know what the F was going on.
Yeah.
And we thought that was just so cool, because again, that meant we were doing something that was, leading edge and going out there.
Yeah.
You remember that distinctly.
Well, it's almost like a punk rock kind of thing, not sonically, but the aesthetic of it, of just doing something that is not what people are listening to. It's not necessarily what they're going to like, but you're kind of innovating and doing something noisy and different and weird, and going that way, which always is the best stuff. I think regardless of what genre you're talking about, someone who just goes out on a limb and tries something new and puts their own stamp on it. Usually that ends up being the best music, whether it's punk or electronic or hip hop or country or jazz or whatever. Like that stuff is always what I'm drawn to as a listener anyway.
Totally agree. Yeah. And, it was kind of weird because Victor was going for his degree in electronic engineering and EE, and I was going for a BA in film theory. So we both realized that one day we're going to have to make a decision. Do we get a degree and become proper adults and make good money, or whatever? That was quite the decision. But yeah, it was being out there making crazy music was just so cool, and to actually personally release Monologue and have people like it.
Yeah.
And get really cool reviews. And I should say that, some of the reviews, which totally blew me away, compared me to Conrad Schnitzler, who was my man.
Cool.
And I actually got the last song on the second side, they compared me to Tangerine Dream.
Oh, really?
Which was really cool back then. So, from Conrad Schnitzler, Tangerine Dream is quite a big difference. But
yeah.
So I got external validation that I was doing something leading edge, and it was just so cool. And when this record thing came out, I was just blown away. Wow.
Yeah.
The
whole new generation discovering it, right? I mean, it's now available, especially with things like Bandcamp and stuff, which is where I first heard it. It's out there, and people can, someone who wasn't even born when you did the first record, when you first released it, could very well be listening to it right now. It's so cool that it's available.
Yeah, that totally freaks me out, by the way.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah. Well, and it's funny. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
It's just such a, it's time travel.
Yeah.
What I created back then is translated into the future. That it doesn't mean much now. It's built for the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that idea. And I think that, I wish more people would sort of consider that, because I think now we're in a culture where everything is so disposable. The way people listen to music, it's all on streaming and stuff. They're not, and the way people watch movies and TV, everything's very much just instant gratification, and then it's gone and you move on to the next thing. But there's obviously value in stuff like this that's been sitting on a shelf for 40 years, and then it gets reintroduced, and then people can see the worth of it and get inspired by it the same way people presumably did 40 years ago.
Yeah. That's one thing that I just wish. See, I don't know how many people listen to it.
Right.
Because I don't follow that. I'm not into streaming, believe it or not. Everything I like, I always download because I don't trust streaming.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Yeah.
And, so if I want to go somewhere, I don't have to worry about streaming costs or whatever, roaming costs on there. I like to download. But yeah, that's, I think that's really cool. Like, I've got some stuff on YouTube and on Instagram, and I get a lot of feedback from that.
Cool.
So people like the direction I'm going. And then every once in a while, I get this shock where somebody says, "Hey, I listened to Monologue," and I go, "Cool. What'd you think?" And, they like it. I don't get any, mind you, you never hear about people that, well, I shouldn't say that, people that hate it. But, I get consistently cool stuff. And then they go, 1982. Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool.
I think the people who are going to like some of that too, I think that are the type of person who's going to give it the chance to sit down and listen to the thing from start to finish, and not just, listen to 30 seconds, then skip ahead to whatever the next music is, right? I think it appeals to a certain type of nerdiness, which is probably the audience has always been there for it, that wants to just absorb it and listen to it repeatedly and just kind of soak it in.
Yeah, that's one thing that I thought was a real thrill for me, was to play the album.
Yeah,
both sides, because I hadn't listened to the cassette in decades. And then I got this record, and I had to buy a record player because I didn't have a record player. So I went out and bought a record player, and I played the whole thing. And it was just it does weird things to your head, because I remember doing most of that stuff. I had a studio in the Bates building on the
Okay.
5th floor. Room 55 was called Electric Language. And all of it was created in that little studio. And it was a really cool place. There was a lot of, it was one of those artists' place. And
Yeah.
I would always go there at night and do 2 or 3 hours. And, you know, when I listened to the record, when I did listen to the record, in its entirety was like, back to that thing, that was time travel, man. That was unbelievable.
That's
And
cool.
all this stuff that happened in between and all that, like, yeah, wow, amazing.
So where can people hear this? If they want to hear Monologue, if they want to, you know, whether it's streaming or downloading or even getting a physical copy, what's the best, where would you sort of direct them to find this music?
To be perfectly candid, I don't know. Where did you find it?
I found it on Bandcamp. One of the things I do, like I've been doing this show for 9 years and I've done almost 700 episodes. So I'm always looking for new to me Winnipeg stuff, because that's sort of the format of the show, right? So I often go to Bandcamp, type in Winnipeg, and just listen to a ton of stuff.
Yeah.
And so this one, I hadn't heard your name before. I didn't know what it was. Hit the first song, which is, it starts off very well. I only got to say it. Like it's really driving and kind of almost heavy, you know, for an intro to the record. And so he hooked me right away, and I listened to it and I was like, oh, this is great. And then just like you said, I discovered in the liner notes at the bottom of the screen, oh wait, this came out in 82. So yeah. I found it kind of by accident on Bandcamp, but I'm glad I did.
Because I believe it's on, some of it's on SoundCloud.
Okay.
I think you can listen to it on, I always forget his thing, Dark Entry Records. I think if you go to the web page for the record, I think there's some links to it. And I don't know, because I don't actively go out trying to find it.
Yeah, but it is there. It's out there. People can search for you and search for Monologue, and they'll probably turn it up at some point.
Yeah, and you know, if you do start looking, you'll find some other stuff. I did a lot of really strange musical type things. I was into filmmaking, and I made a film, did the music for that, which is, it's called 38 Jansky Units. It's crazy.
Cool.
It's on YouTube. And yeah, that's one thing I've never actually searched out to see where I can listen to the entire album, because I'm one of the, okay, so here's a confession here. I went and bought my own record because it's my record. So whenever somebody asks me, the first thing I do is I go completely analog and I say, go buy it.
Yeah.
You know, and then people get all bent out of shape because they want a free album. So, you know. But I'm pretty analog for that kind of stuff. I think you should, you know,
totally.
But that's not the way it works nowadays.
So if someone wants to buy it, I mean, should they contact you, or do you send them to, I guess, Wild Planet now?
Yeah. I don't know how many copies he's got left, but I think Josh has got a bunch in San Francisco. So if Roman runs out, I can't remember how many we pressed.
Okay.
But they're out there, and yeah, you can get them if you want to. And like I say, now you've sort of piqued my interest. I don't know if I should go out. I think I'm going to go out and look and see where I can find this thing.
Yeah, right on.